In the late 1700s, Havre, formerly known as Susquehanna Ferry, had approximately 50 houses with a population of about 250 people. In 1814, after a small population growth, the British attacked and pillaged the town, setting back modest economic gains. By the mid-1800s, however, the anticipation of the completion of the Susquehanna and Tidewater canals between Wrightsville, Pennsylvania, and Havre excited the residents. It also attracted outsiders to settle in the town with the anticipation of forthcoming prosperity. This is that story.
In 1796, an intrepid and daring miller by the name of Crider, living in Huntingdon, Pennsylvania, along the Juniata River, fashioned together a robust barge made of sturdy timbers and loaded it with 104 barrels of his flour. One spring morning, when the Susquehanna River was high due to rains known as freshets, he set out floating towards the Chesapeake Bay. His sturdy craft, later called an ark, rode over many of the rocky impediments in the lower river, and when an obstacle was struck, it held together, and he arrived safely at Havre. His flour was loaded aboard a shallop and delivered to Baltimore agents who paid him a very good price. This daring adventure was a game-changer for Philadelphia merchants who had an ongoing trade rivalry with Baltimore and considered Susquehanna Valley products their bounty and were not to be used to benefit a rival city. More arks were to follow and made the plight of Pennsylvania merchants even worse. This resulted in a regional trade war, not to be fought with guns and gunpowder, but with laws and legislation. In 1799, the Pennsylvania Assembly passed an ordinance prohibiting improvement in the lower Susquehanna that would aid navigation. This law was later rescinded in 1801 when Maryland agreed to the construction of a cross-peninsular Chesapeake and Delaware Canal. This construction effort actually began May 2, 1804. However, 1 year later, funds were exhausted and the effort was suspended. To avoid the downstream navigation hazards in the lower Susquehanna, as early as 1783, the Maryland General Assembly had authorized the construction of an east side canal from its boundary with Pennsylvania to Tidewater. This little-known waterway opened in 1805 with a Cecil County terminus at Port Deposit, across the river from Lapidum in Harford County. Now, even more Susquehanna Valley products were finding their way to Baltimore, much to the dismay of Philadelphia merchants. Pennsylvania considered road improvements, but eventually realized the abandoned Chesapeake and Delaware Canal was the transportation solution. The War of 1812 intervened, and it would be 1824, under the leadership of Matthew Carey, before canal construction finally got underway, with its completion in late 1829. By this time, both Philadelphia and Baltimore had available imported goods such as sugar, coffee, spices, and bolts of manufactured cloth that were desired by settlers in the Susquehanna Valley. But vessels coming down the river made only a one-way trip. It was recognized that an improved lock waterway with canal barges operating back and forth between Wrightsville, Pennsylvania and the Tidewater at Havre would provide a critical transportation link. By 1835, both states had passed enabling legislation, and by 1840, the Susquehanna Canal in Pennsylvania linked with the Tidewater Canal in Maryland, providing two-way traffic between two towns 45 miles distant. In anticipation of the forthcoming canal, Havre land speculators began buying up town property, hoping to take advantage of anticipated rising prices once the waterway was in operation. Some even went so far as constructing elegant brick houses along Union Avenue, using a technique that might be called financial chumming, with plans to hook entrepreneurs into investing in the town as they themselves were already successful. Two such dwellings located on opposite sides of South Union Avenue are the Hoke House at 212 and the Sappington House at 213. Somewhat like twins facing each other, both were erected in 1838 and share Greek Revival-style features. Each one is 3 bays wide, with wide attic dormers, and both have lighted basements where the kitchens were located. Front porches, however, were treated very differently. By June 1840, the Tidewater Canal termination at Havre had been completed, and the dignitaries of the day held a celebration aboard the steamboat Carol, where a toast was given by an individual whose name has been lost to history. He opined, Havre, similar in appearance to an elevated plane, enchanting to all who see it. Though long unnoticed, it is soon to become the depot of the Western world. When the first canal boats arrived in 1840, however, Havre was not ready with steam tugs to tow them to awaiting ports, so the goods had to be transferred onto sailing ships. In retrospect, Peter J., in his 1986 book Havre, An Informal History, noted, "The canal opening gave the town real hope, and Havre seemed destined for a rosy economic future." Indeed, during 9 months of operation in 1840, some of the goods received at Havre were significant amounts of corn, iron, steel, slate, lime, flour, and paper. Goods going up the canal were pieces of tinware, groceries, hardware, dry goods, grindstones, millstones, drugs, furniture, clay pipe, castings, salt, and wooden shingles. The canal was providing a much-needed transportation corridor, but its optimistic future had an overhanging dark cloud, represented by very high maintenance cost of the waterway. Significant flooding followed heavy rains, and the canal, being located in a floodplain, was being severely damaged. As early as April 7, 1841, the Canal Company was advertising, "Wanted immediately, 100 hands and 40 carts and horses to go to Havre to work on the Tidewater Canal." Improvement to the canal banks and locks would be made, but eventually flooding would be the canal's Achilles heel. When early roads were built by private companies in America, the operators would establish points of money collection known as toll houses, accompanied by locked toll gates. In Harford County, Tollgate Road takes its name from a toll house that was located where Harford Mall stands today. On the Susquehanna and Tidewater canals, toll collectors were located at Wrightsville and Havre, where every entering or departing boat underwent a change in elevation. Thus, the key to opening these locks and passing through was the payment of a toll. A canal barge is shown on the left in a lock ready to head upstream, where the upper darker blue water represents the higher level. The lower lock swing gates have been closed by the lock tender. The barge will be raised by allowing the higher level water into the lock, but water pressure in the upper canal holds the top swing gates securely in place. In the center, a side view of one of the swing gates is illustrated, revealing a so-called wicket at the bottom, which is opened by the lock tender through rotating the top side wicket lever. This is done for both the left and right swing gates, and the water in the lower canal gradually is filled from the upper level, raising the canal barge. The illustration on the right shows the lock with the barge now surrounded by the darker blue water representing the upper level. After the swing gates at the top are opened, the barge, pulled by a pair of mules, is allowed to continue up the canal. A complementary procedure is used for boats descending the canal. A canal boat or barge was built to transport tons of goods along an inland waterway, and also to shelter and provide feed for the mules that, during daylight hours, pulled the boat along an adjacent canal towpath. In many cases, the barge operator, being away much of the time, had onboard facilities to house his family that included a galley and sleeping quarters. If he had a son able to handle the mules, the lad would walk barefooted ahead of them or ride one to earn the title of mule boy, or perhaps a historic term known as a hoggy. As there was a tendency for the barge to veer toward the mules on the towpath, a steersman on board the vessel manned a stern-mounted rudder to maintain a position close to the center of the canal. The boats did not travel at night, but would tie up along the canal, and the family would have dinner by lantern light. After a day of helping her mother tidy up things in the kitchen, their daughter was ready for a night's rest. Likewise, Mule Boy had trod many miles and earned his rest until the dawn of the next day. In order for the Canal Company to maintain accurate records, each canal boat had to display a unique name. In the case of a barge owner traveling with his family, he often chose the name of his wife or another family relative. Writer Samuel Mason recorded a vessel with a series of images across the stern. There was an uppercase R, followed by a tin can image, then a handsaw, and lastly, a man with a pack. When put together, it spelled Arkansas Traveler. There are a few written accounts of the impression of individuals who chose a canal boat as a means of travel. In 1850, a correspondent for the Cecil Whig took a stage from Elkton to Havre and secured passage on a canal boat that was heading north to Wrightsville, Pennsylvania. Prior to reaching a lock, the boat operator would blow a conch shell to alert the lock tender of his forthcoming approach. The newspaper writer recorded, "At one of the locks, a pretty young girl of about 16 or 17 came running out to open the lock. She was a sweet-looking creature, as plump as a partridge, and with the proper dress she would have drawn a crowd of admirers." An examination of the products ascending the canal in 1841 showed many of the same 1840 items were still in demand. But in addition, a few new products were being barged northward. Among these was sheet tin, in addition to tinware, and ship stores that consisted of tar, rosin, and pitch. As well, there was oysters, fish, tobacco, and imported mahogany lumber, the wood no doubt for furniture and coffin construction. The descending canal boats, sometimes as many as 100, would queue in the Havre Canal basin and await their turn to be locked through into the Chesapeake Bay. Afterwards, a number of them were towed to the entrance of the Chesapeake and Delaware Canal or to a wharf in Baltimore. The Philadelphia and Havre Tow Company was established by March 1841. However, Baltimore dallied, but finally by 1848 had in operation the Baltimore and Susquehanna Steam Company. It would be a decade, though, before Baltimore received more canal boats than Philadelphia, then with the principal product being Pennsylvania coal. Other canal boats had their cargoes offloaded at a Havre dock and transferred to bay boats or to the railroad. This activity required wheeled carts and wagons that in turn necessitated the skills of a wheelwright. The manufacture of a wooden spoked wheel was critical. However, the services of a blacksmith were required to produce and install an iron rim called a tire. The blacksmith would also fashion iron axles and other miscellaneous metal parts to allow a wagon builder to complete a wheeled conveyance. Power to move the carts and wagons was supplied by horses or mules that might be obtained from a local farmer or a horse trader. Hitching these animals to the vehicles required leather harnesses that were probably obtained locally. All of these trades coalesced to stimulate the Havre economy and grow its population. Elnathan Noble Woodhouse was born in Port Deposit in 1833 and moved with his family to Havre in the early 1840s when he was about 10 years old. Recalling detailed memories he later wrote in a newspaper, on the completion of the Tidewater Canal, Havre received a large addition to its population from all sections of the country, who boomed the place away up in the real estate market. The town had been quiet until the canal terminated there, bringing products from the interior from Pennsylvania to be sold or shipped. This opened up a vast prospect for profitable businesses with the accumulation of wealth and the building up of a large city. Paraphrasing Woodhouse, he recalled, "Around the wharves of the upper part of the town could constantly be seen a perfect forest of vessel masts, which vessels were taking on and discharging cargo. These sailing packets were operating on a regular schedule and plied between Havre, Philadelphia, Baltimore, and other ports. The wharves were piled with millstones, French burr, pig iron, lumber, and many other things, and the warehouses were full to overflowing with goods in transit." French burr was a type of imported material that was used to make the very best quality grinding stones for processing wheat into flour. Much of it went to Baltimore and Philadelphia, where craftsmen there shaped and arranged the pieces inside an iron rim to construct millstones that were much needed in the Susquehanna Valley. No doubt artisans in central Pennsylvania wanted to make homegrown millstones, so the French burr was likely headed there. Continuing, Woodhouse noted, labor was plenty. More so than laborers, houses were being built. People from other states were moving in. Walks were being laid. And it was beginning to look as though the march of improvement had reached Havre de Grace, and it was on its way to future greatness. When the Havre de Grace boardwalk is mentioned today, it is a reference to the promenade that skirts along a portion of the waterfront from the Concord Point Lighthouse to the yacht basin. Historically, in the day of Woodhouse, it was a raised plank sidewalk in front of stores that provided pedestrians a relatively clean place to stroll, thereby avoiding the dirt and oyster shell streets. This improvement, opined Woodhouse, was the pride of the town and known far and near as the boardwalk. Everyone was doing well enough, although no one was rolling up millions, but everyone seemed happy and satisfied with the way things were booming. The half-century of Tidewater Canal operation between 1840 and 1890 reflects the golden years of grand house construction in Havre de Grace. This is abundantly demonstrated by a tour of Union Avenue, and also venturing one block east at the intersection of Congress Avenue. A handful of these magnificent structures resulted directly from canal activity, while many others came about by taking advantage of the city's booming economy, such as in the operation of hotels or the opening of merchandising stores. As an ensemble, these refined and stylish houses, as well as other scattered structures, reflect an era of prosperity that also spilled over into the construction of magnificent churches. Stephen J Seneca was a vegetable and fruit canner whose Red Cross-labeled products were supplied by rail and packets to urban areas such as Baltimore, and most likely sent up the Tidewater Canal to villages in the Susquehanna Valley. About 1869, he built a mansion with Queen Anne features at 200 North Union Avenue that was extensively remodeled around 1901. Having an iron production background attained at Sarah Furnace in Harford County, in 1866, A.P. McCombs acquired the Havre de Grace Iron Works at the end of Bourbon Street. 2 years later, he established the Havre de Grace Republican newspaper that featured current events and also carried paid ads for local businesses. In 1880, he built a Gothic Revival cottage facing east at 120 South Union, which was at the corner of Bourbon Street. The finest example of Queen Anne architecture in Havre de Grace was built by then-mayor Murray Vandiver in 1886. His father had deep roots in the town, having arrived before 1839, at which time he was the contractor for building the Lapidum Lock for the Tidewater Canal. Located at 301 South Union Avenue, today this historic structure serves as a bed and breakfast. When Susquehanna Valley products arrived on canal boats in Havre de Grace, merchants, or so-called middlemen from Philadelphia, Baltimore, and other ports were nearby to acquire the goods and then make arrangements with bay boat captains for transport to the merchant's desired designated destination. Most of these buyers lived in distant port towns or cities, and when in Havre de Grace, stayed at hotels. Thus, what we today call the hospitality industry was alive, with the United States Hotel having been established in 1836 by John Donahue, who is best remembered as the builder of Chesapeake Bay lighthouses, including the one at Concord Point. The hotel was later operated by John P. Adams, as shown in this advertisement. It burned in 1879, and the site today is the location of Seneca Cannery Antiques. Hopper's Hotel, near the Canal Basin, was in operation by at least 1847, when it was the location of an administrator's sale for the disposition of 2 fishing floats. John A. Hopper was mentioned as the proprietor in 1856, when another auction was held in the facility. Later, in 1871, it was identified as the Lock Hotel, when Thomas Haynes was charging $1 a day for board. Based on its location, this was a principal place for canal boat operators to stay while their cargoes were being towed to distant ports. Finally known as the Brick Hotel, the stable attached thereto was torn down, and later the hotel, as the railroad had become the king of long-distance hauling. Sebastian Kurtz emigrated from Württemberg, Germany to the United States about 1832 and settled in Havre de Grace in 1837, then assisting in building the outlet lock for the Tidewater Canal. In In 1867, he was listed in city directories as having a hotel, saloon, and stable on Erie Street. By 1875, however, the court ordered the sale of his large frame tavern house and stabling attached thereto. He died in 1881 at the age of 67. The Harford Democrat of January 1, 1869, announced the opening of James Nixon's Hotel on Washington Street, noting he has also in connection with his hotel an eating bar where chickens, ducks, oysters, and all the delicacies of the season are served in the latest style. As well, Nixon kept a stable where horses were available for hire. By 1871, he was charging patrons $2 for board. He closed the hotel in 1878, whereupon it was reopened by J.P. Adams. An early mention of the Susquehanna Hotel on Market Street is found in an 1871 directory listing Thomas Young as the proprietor and charging patrons 75 cents per day. In 1874, the hotel got a mention in the Havre de Grace Republican when it reported, "Wednesday morning, fire and smoke issuing from the roof of the Susquehanna Hotel was speedily extinguished. The damage was largely confined to articles of furniture and clothing in the apartment where the fire first started." In 1871, the Harford House, located at the corner of St. John Street and Union Avenue, was operated by John P. Adams. Later, the Washington Street Hotel entrance was relocated to a more elegant corner entrance below the Harford House sign. By 1895, the hotel operator was Frank B. Boyd, who introduced his own brand of Sherwood whiskey. It is learned from the Havre de Grace Republican that Mr. Boyd also purchased a pretty new carriage as a passenger conveyance between the hotel and railroad station. It was built by Burns Brothers of Havre de Grace, with the newspaper noting that a new harness adorns the horse that draws the wagon, and its well-known driver seems proud of his handsome carriage. On May 11, 1894, Isaac Hecht ran an ad in the Havre de Grace Republican announcing that Hecht's Hotel near the Philadelphia, Wilmington, and Baltimore Railroad Depot was now open for the accommodation of guests. The rate was $2 per day, and the bar was stocked with the finest whiskeys, brandies, wines, and champagnes, and he was also serving the celebrated Rochester beer on draft and in bottles for family trade. When the section of the Tidewater Canal from Lapidum to Havre de Grace was constructed, it proved to be a very expensive portion, costing $250,000. The canal channel itself was essentially free, as it was in the Susquehanna River, but the expense was almost totally associated with the towpath for the mules. To create this 4-mile-long track, it was necessary to mine and dump stones into the river against driven piles to create a walking trail that was above the canal's water elevation. Although not intended for public use, travelers from Havre de Grace took advantage of the canal's towpath when proceeding north to points along the Susquehanna River. It is believed that the company of Richard Crossett and Jacob Spar built the 2-story lock house at Havre de Grace, as they were contractors for the Canal Company and had already completed the outlet lock there. The front of the house sets about 50 feet back from the canal and has 2 front doors and 2 back doors. Unlike the smaller whitewashed frame houses of lock tenders along the canal, this structure was twice the size, with impressive features functioning as the toll collector's office, as well as a dwelling for the lockkeeper and his family. Each of these individuals had specific duties. Working at his desk, the toll collector was an agent and representative of the Canal Company, who was responsible for checking vessel manifests, assessing the proper toll, collecting the money, and most importantly, keeping accurate records. Stephen J Mcgraw was the first toll collector, being succeeded by Charles B Hitchcock in 1847, who lived at 667 Otsego Street. Hitchcock died in 1875 when the collection duties passed to Thomas Wilson, who remained in charge until the canal closed about 1900. As indicated by his title, the lock tender's duties were focused on the physical responsibilities of getting vessels going both ways through the Havre de Grace Tidewater Canal lock. This would have included repositioning the lock gates, operating the gate wickets, and rotating the pivot bridge. In addition, he would have taken care of routine maintenance associated with the lock and keeping tidy the general appearance of the area. The lock tender was an employee of the Canal Company and, unlike the toll collector, had no managerial responsibility. In addition to his salary, the Canal Company provided living quarters that were considered part of his compensation. It is believed that Irish-born Thomas Grail was the first lock tender, followed by Carvel Maslin from about 1865 to 1900. The lock house is constructed of brick laid in common bond, each brick measuring 8.5 inches long, 4 1/4 wide, and 2 1/8 thick. It is known that in Harford County, brick sizes gradually reduced from a volume of 92 cubic inches in 1724 to the standard of 65 cubic inches by 1900. Thus, lockhouse bricks of 77 cubic inches fit nicely into this historical trend. It is most highly probable the bricks were made locally, as in 1803 Benjamin Henry Latrobe had written to Thomas Jefferson reporting about the millions of bricks being laid in Havre. As these vitrified clay blocks were heavy, it was not practical to transport them long distances over primitive roads. Local manufacture is also supported by the presence of a pre-1812 brick factory in Havre that was pointed out in the writings of aforementioned Havre resident E. N. Woodhouse. It seems certain that the first-floor northeast room with an extra window for a better view of the canal and the holding basin was used as an office. This was the largest room in the house and initially served as the headquarters for the Tidewater Canal Company. For 1 year, the canal superintendent was a resident of Havre named William Boyd, who wore his hair in a braille hanging from the back of his head called a queue. It was reported by Woodhouse that he was also a horse trader. If he bought an animal that turned out to be good, it belonged to him. Otherwise, it became the property of the Canal Company. Later, Daniel F. Shure, whose portrait hangs on one of the office walls, became the superintendent and served for almost 50 years. He lived at Shure's Landing, near the village of Darlington. During the period from 1825 to 1860, the Greek Revival architectural style was popular in Havre, leading some historians to identify the lockhouse design and its construction with that era. On closer examination, however, the design is much closer to the earlier 1780 to 1820 architecture of the Federal era. Such structures traditionally had an A-framed roof, but there were variations that featured a low-pitched hip roof as found on the lockhouse. Another clue is the front-facing tripartite windows that feature an arched lintel. Further, the bullseye corner blocks are another Federal characteristic, as are the angled bricks under the overhanging roof that emulate dentil molding. While architects are generally forward-looking, adopting the latest trends, builders look back, constructing what was seen and known to work. In any case, the lockhouse exhibits a distinctive and engaging appearance from other contemporaneous structures in Havre, and its staff there welcomes visitors.
For the past 1/2 century, the lockhouse in Havre has served as a museum, interpreting the canal and more recently its economic impact on the area. One unique feature housed therein is a working model of a canal lock that realistically demonstrates to a visitor how the operation was accomplished. Further, artifacts and other exhibits throughout will enlighten every participant who will depart with a far better understanding of Harford County's rich and very diverse heritage.
Low Bridge, everybody down. Low Bridge, 'cause we're coming through a town. And you'll always know your neighbor, you'll always know your pal. If you've